All right, boys and girls, we are back with another edition of the Federalist Radio Hour. I'm your host, Ben Domenech. You can email us, as always, at radio@thefederalist.com. Follow us on Twitter at FDRLST. I'm happy to be joined today by Ryan Long, who you can follow on Twitter at Ryan Long Comedy. You can also find his YouTube channel on YouTube at Ryan Long Comedy. You should definitely subscribe to his feed because it's the reason that I asked to talk to him today. Ryan, thanks so much for taking the time to join us from New York.
Hell yeah, man. Oh, I didn't even notice you had the Ric Flair shirt on.
Woo!
Yeah, that's great.
Yeah, so we aren't actually supposed to talk about the Nature Boy, but he is quite an entertaining character. Have you seen the 30 for 30 about him? Because if you haven't, you should in this.
No, what's the oh, I haven't seen that.
Yeah, look that one up because it's pretty entertaining. And if you're starved for sports as I am in this climate,
nice.
It's good to go back and rewatch it. So Ryan, you've been doing comedy for quite a while. You came down to us from the frozen north.
Yeah, man. So I just moved here maybe like 8-9 months ago. So I was here for about 3 months, and then your country shut down, and then now the streets are race riots. So I picked an amazing time to move to New York.
Did you happen to bring it with you? Like, is this your fault?
Yeah, this was the world saying, "Get the hell out of here."
Yeah.
we've got enough Canadians here.
You are obviously someone who's been doing the Boyscast, a podcast, for quite some time. But the reason that I started to pay attention to you is because of these little short videos that you do that are amazing and hilarious and well edited. And in particular, one which came out a couple of weeks ago, in which you were talking about being fired from Vice, or rather your character, Mark Diamond, talking about being fired from Vice. And the thing that happened is that most of the people I know who work at Vice started to send it to me saying, I can't share this, but can you?
Well, it was so amazing because, I mean, I've been saying Vice was a specific one for me that kind of represents the most nonsense you've ever seen. So they're posting all these articles, and it's like, why men are cutting off their penis if they aren't even trans. and they these insane articles about like just from top to bottom, you're like, who on earth would ever read this? Mm-hmm. So, and then afterwards they get fired, and then this girl goes, she on this big tirade on Twitter, and she was like, I'm the only person that's sticking up for trans people. And her articles are like, yes, there are trans animals. Like, these are the kind of things she's writing. And she goes, I'm the only person making these articles, and they fired me. And you're like, yeah, but there's still a company. Your audience has got to be 3 people. So Vice is the most representation right now. And there's a few others, but Vice is worse because they used to be kind of like this cool skateboard counterculture magazine. And they've just been like completely infiltrated by this nonsense. So it's fun to watch, them have to like reap the repercussions of like going down this path that no one wants to fucking watch.
Have you seen the Documentary Now episode with Bill Hader and Fred Armisen?
Yeah, I love Fred Armisen.
Yeah, Drones, I think, is their stand-in name for it, with a Z.
Right.
We're drones. We go where the New York Times won't, and get killed and that kind of thing.
We were actually working on a pilot that was with one of my I own a bit of this website, and we were working on this pilot that it was going to be kind of like a Vice office where the gist of it was they were going to interview the most racist. They were going to interview like this racist guy, and then he cancels. So last minute they need to like find another racist. So they're like, oh, my dad's a little bit racist. Maybe we can get him. Like, they're just trying to find a racist. And I actually did an interview on the street once where I found a guy, and I'm from Vice, and we couldn't find someone racist. Can we just say you're racist? And that's what they do. They're just, they know what they want to say. We know we need racists. We know we need, transphobes, and there's not enough of them. So they just have to create them.
Do you go to the same park when you're doing?
Yeah, I go to Union Square. Yeah,
you're doing Union Square. I thought you were in park interviews. How surprised were you at the willingness or lack thereof of people to turn in their friends and neighbors to the De Blasio snitches get yeah.
That was the best, because de Blasio went from in 5 seconds. He was all, you need to call your parents. You need to, report your neighbors. So I went out in Union Square and I was interviewing people being like, we're going to give you $5 if you can give your neighbors. And no one wanted to give me their family's number, but everyone was kind of like, just so you know, like there's kids over there. This one lady's like, there's kids playing basketball on 34th Street, and then she goes, by my house, there's a bunch of people out there every night, so I recommend you go there. I go, what do they do? And she goes, they're congregating.
Well, it's very look, there's always within traumatic incidences in the history of the country, there's always someone who emerges as a comedic voice who figures out the way to make comedy out of something that's actually difficult to make original comedy out of. And I listen to a lot of comedian podcasts and I follow a lot of comedians. One comedian that I like a lot actually is a guy named Mark Normand. I don't know if he's
I know Mark,
a friend or enemy of yours. But he like went out and started doing a couple of sets in Texas and posted some footage from his set in
it's going very viral.
Dallas, which is good, but it also kind of puts in perspective because he's kind of struggling through the set, like he's relying on notes and stuff, and it's he's rusty and he's trying to get it going. It puts in perspective how hard it is as a comedian to get back in your rhythm when you've been out of it. It's kind of like what we're going to see, I think, unfortunately, in sports when it comes back, where all these athletes who are out of their rhythm, out of their sequence, used to pitching every couple of days, that type of thing, have to find it again.
Yeah, Ric Flair's not going to remember how to do his woos.
Exactly. Are you basically doing these videos to make sure that you stay in that rhythm, even during a period where it's so hard to do it?
Well, for me, it was kind of like, it feels like to America, a lot of people kind of, even like you're like, you probably never heard of me or anyone's never heard of me, but like I've been doing this for a long time, just in a different country, right? So this is, I had
seen your just to put in perspective, I had seen your YouTube post of Nanette 2. That was the only thing that I had seen of yours until the Vice video, and then I realized you were making these little videos, and I was like, "Oh wow, that kind of thing." So anyway,
I was doing this. I had a couple of TV shows and all that stuff, and then when I came here, I was kind of like, "Listen, I'm just going to do my own thing. I'm going to release my own podcast, do a video once a week, and I'm not going to take any jobs." So I didn't take any, jobs writing for networks or doing. I had I was going to do for example, another digital series with Funny or Die or things like that, and I said I'm not going to do any of that stuff. I'm going to do stand up, get into the New York club scene, and then release my video every Monday and then release my podcast. So. And then that's kind of been all popping off and working. So it was cool. But as far as to keep chops, that was already what I was doing. But it was nice to have a little extra time. Because, stand up every night, when that finally stopped and I was like, for the first 3 weeks, you're like, this sucks. And after a month, you're kind of like, why did I ever do stand up? That sucked. This is way better. But the thing that I miss as far as making videos and making content and being, a great artist that stand-up was providing is knowing where the lines are and knowing where the pulse is. And I think that was something I was really good at. So, because, you could say is this too much? Is this too soon? But you don't need to ask those questions when you do stand-up because you do it 3 times a night. So 3 times a night, I would do it in front of an audience of 100 people and I would kind of know where those lines are. Mm-hmm. So I feel like the one thing, even this was such a landmine, same with the D Elia stuff, the race riots, all of this stuff was, if you're a normal person, stay out of it. There is nothing you can say that isn't the wrong thing, right? So with stand up, I always kind of felt one of the greatest things. I feel everyone was like, oh, this guy's so fearless, but it wasn't that I was fearless. It was, I was really on my game, So it's kind of you mentioned an athlete that looks like he's doing something crazy, but I kind of felt like he knew he could, Mm-hmm. So I feel like that's one thing that I've lost. I'm playing a little more of a guessing game of is this a lot? Whereas when I was really on my game doing stand-up 3 times a night, I felt like I knew where those energy pockets were a little better.
There was, I listened to Bill Burr's podcast pretty consistently, and he had an episode maybe 2-3 weeks ago where someone wrote into him and just talked about how much they laughed at one of the jokes he made. And he responded with this little sort of 2-minute saying into, that actually makes me feel really good because I haven't heard someone laugh at my jokes in X number of months, and I'm dying here because I don't know which joke is the joke that works or the line that works, and I don't have that immediate feedback of being able to walk into the next room and know, okay, I'm going to do it this way this time.
Totally.
It has to be.
Even from
go ahead.
for what you do, like, I'm sure you have opinions that sometimes you kind of, even like what your take's going to be on something, sometimes is a work in progress, you'll say something and then you're like, oh, this is what I think. As you say it, you're like, it might be right, but I don't know if I really feel that way. And then you kind of, you find the way that how you feel saying it combined with how other people seem to react to the way you say it. And you kind of get to the bottom of how you actually feel about things.
You don't know how to construct the argument in the way that you normally would if you were talking through it with people just in the normal way of living. In terms of comedy clubs, they've got to be one of the things that's going to come back slowest across the country, right? I mean, they're small. Good. They're basically, infection rooms, like even smaller than theaters. You can space out in theaters. Yeah. Is that going to be a problem for you?
I did a couple shows last week. So they basically the stand-up
in New York.
Stand Up New York is a club, and they were like, you know what, we're going to do like Monday, Wednesday, Friday, these underground shows, and they did 2 of them, and then Cuomo started the governor started, I mean, obviously you know that, but I just found
it could have been Chris. I don't know. He narcs on a lot of people.
Yeah. So he started calling all the clubs and being like, yo, if you're open, we're taking your liquor license away. Cause it's mayhem out here. Cause everyone is over Corona. You know what I mean? The people, they go, so the bars right now, if you go, they're like, you can't be in bars, but the streets are like New Orleans right now.
Yeah.
So if it's wild out here, right? So you go on the corner of in the East Village, and it's like a block party every night because people are like, all right, well, no one cares anymore. Some people do, but most people don't. So then they were like, screw it, we're gonna do a stand-up show, and it was awesome. People were coming, and then the governor friggin' is calling places, and he goes, if you do this, we're taking your liquor license away, and this guy. And they're getting a lot of government subsidies right now too. So they're like, all right, well, I guess that's done. Yeah. So back to square one. I don't know.
The one thing that I think is ridiculous is I have watched a little bit of the people who've attempted to do stand-up or comedy routines via Zoom, and it doesn't work. I mean, it's just
it's not the same thing.
It's not the same thing, and I feel like I understand that people feel the need to keep things going, but doing a podcast or doing little videos to me seems like a much better way to use your time. There's a handful of comics who have leaned into this moment because they already had some kind of YouTube base or streaming, ability to create stuff. Andrew Schultz is one. There's others.
Yeah, Schultz has been killing it.
Who have it, and it's funny though to see the older guard, the people who are used to 30-person writers' rooms and the audience clapter and stuff like that, try to do their shows, because it really shows through, I think, how weak their product is and how they don't really have the comedic chops to keep things going when they don't have that built-in TV, huge base of support staff.
I agree. Yeah.
And that to me has just been revelatory of how weak that product has been. What do you want to do?
And you take away the honesty too, right? Like, one thing that they don't have is, they have these big productions, and that's what you're used to seeing, and that's what it is. And people like Schultz are still building that. But what really they're missing is they're not telling the truth, right? Mm-hmm. So if we're both on stage, just a microphone, and you're saying stuff that people know are lying, and telling people, it's kind of like all these shows, they go to, Middle America, and they go to all these places, they go, hey, this is what you like now. And they go, no, it's not, and they go, well, too bad. That's what you're getting. So
you're going to get a very heartwarming story about, a trans person or even a non-trans person cutting off their dick. And that's what you like.
It's insane. They go, so in Canada, it's even, worse than here, but like, if you look at what the podcast scene is and who's doing well, and, people like you that have big audiences, and you think about like Joe Rogan or Theo Vaughn, and I mean, it's pretty obvious to look at the podcast charts and be like, okay, this is what's doing well. That kind of person sort of got cast out of the mainstream, and that's what the podcast market is. The big thing, they just put billboards everywhere. Their push is a show called Gay Asian, and it's a podcast. They just started it. It's about a gay Asian guy telling his stories about being gay or whatever, and you're like, you're like, okay, so what do people like? Joe Rogan. All right, let's double down on gay Asian. Like, imagine being in that writing room of like, what's going to be our big push for our network? And they're like, gay Asian. And you're like, if I was a minority, I would hate this. I would hate this. You'd be why don't you just do, if you want to do like a minority thing, do a brown Joe Rogan and saying that stuff, you know? Why do we have to say you're stupid like white people liberal shit and you get a minority to say their nonsense?
Yeah, why don't you find the Cuban version of Joe Rogan, in
if
South
you really
Florida.
want that, if you need it to be diversity, you want them to say you're like 20-year-old white girl, like not woke nonsense, and you just get a brown guy to say it for you.
All right, so let's talk about 20-year-old roving bands of angry woke white women terrorizing a nation. I have seen this trend, and I'm not saying that most of the rioting is even being done by white women, or most of the violence is being done by white women. A white woman did set that Wendy's on fire. A white woman has, white women have been arrested repeatedly for a lot of different angry violence. It was a white woman who stormed out of the crowd in Madison, Wisconsin the other night to attack an openly gay Democratic state senator who happened to just be standing nearby. But I understand that, they're not maybe the majority of the crowd, but they do have kind of this really loud megaphone, and they seem to be in these filmable incidents over and over again. I sent you one from the other night in Washington, D.C., where it's this woke white woman just yelling at this group of cops, which is mostly minority because most of the cops in D.C. are black, because it's a very
That's my favorite thing is the white women calling the black cops racist. It's phenomenal.
Yes. It's amazing. And I guess my question to you is, do they really not see themselves in this moment? Or have they just subsumed this idea into their head that systemic racism means if you are wearing a badge, if you are a cop, that automatically means you're probably racist, and it doesn't matter who you are, where you came from, what your skin color is, what your family experience is, you're just part of systemic racism, and I am the bold, brave ally correcting you in your ways.
Yeah, I mean, I think you're being generous with that synopsis. To me, it's let's make this about us, And the truth is, there's like 20-year-old like brown chicks that act like 20-year-old white girls. Like 21-year-old white girl is a ideology, and there's plenty of 20-year-old Asian chicks acting like 20-year-old white chicks. But there's always been a struggle versus like, because a lot of these agendas don't align. Like the black agenda and the feminist agenda don't really align a lot, right? It's kind of like back in the day when they were like, believe all women, and you're like, ask a black guy in 1940 if he thinks you should believe all women, So there's always kind of been this struggle, and then they're like, so and then it's like, what's higher? What's higher on the victim thing, a woman or a black guy? And there's always been a bit of a decision there to make, right?
Yeah, so, how does believe all women work in To Kill a Mockingbird?
100%. So they see this happening, and they're like, we need to take back this movement for the chicks again. So we need to insert ourselves right in the middle of this thing and take back the power. So I think it's just about, putting themselves at the front of this movement. They're like, listen, this movement is intersectional. It's not going to be about Black Lives Matter. It's going to be about trans lives. And, trans lives matter is their all lives matter. You know what I mean? Because they go Black Lives Matter, and they go, yeah, but it's trans lives matter. And they got to insert every single cause and just make this all muddy. It's kind of like how it started at first. It was about police brutality. And now they're like, well, also it's going to be about statues and all. We need to cancel anyone who says anything racist. And who did blackface in 1940? And you're like, aren't we talking about like regulations for cops? And you're like, well, I don't know, maybe we were, maybe we weren't. So it's all about like muddying the waters, making everything intersectional, and putting them at the forefront of whatever the movement is.
And that, of course, is completely at odds with what the good part of what this could have achieved, maybe 100%. Will achieve, but could have achieved from the get-go, which is police brutality is a problem, and we do need to have police reforms. And it's a good thing that like we are paying attention to the fact that we like have a really crappy reporting of like data, and that cops aren't telling us what they're doing and where, and we should probably have evaluations. And
the unions are too strong.
Unions are too strong. You should do 10 times as much training as you do. Like it's all these different elements of it, and then it's like, why are we talking about Christopher Columbus now?
It's insanity.
I mean,
well, it's a classic overplaying of your hand. That like it's a feminine movement, and they're bad at negotiating. Because and you also, and it's like if you are if you have a wife or something, and she was like, listen, I think that I'd like you to take me out more or whatever. And then you go, okay, I do that. And she's like, I'm still not happy. I don't want you to hang out with those friends anymore. And she's like, actually, I want you to get a haircut. I want you to do this. And you're like, it sounds like we just don't get along. And it kind of feels like that, where they go, I think a lot of people would be on board with the idea that there needs to be some police reform. And they're like, okay, also, we need all the statues taken down. They go, and you people like Sean King, who's the head of Black Lives Matter. He's like, also we need Jesus taken down. And you're like, in what world do you think this is even a reasonable negotiating position? Can you imagine being at the table and like slipping, here's our demands. And you're like, we need all Jesus is taken down. And you're like, what are you talking about? It's like like I said, if it was the husband analogy, sitting down with your husband and you're like, these are my demands. I want you to buy me a palace in India tomorrow. And your husband works in a factory. You're like, what are you talking about? What dream world are you living in? So this is kind of what's happened.
How does justice for George Floyd lead to smash all the non-black Jesuses? Like, that's just, it's total
it's insanity. And the whole thing's based on some nonsense where they go, Jesus was created for white supremacy, that's why he's white. And it's like, he was white because the people there were white, like every other in the history of the world. Like, yeah, China, find me a Chinese god that's black. Like, what are you talking about? So they're just so crazy.
The part of their assertion of a lot of these woke white women has been to kind of push Me Too back into the center during this. Yes, my Bill Cosby record is problematic. I will acknowledge that. Bill Cosby was also very funny, and so I can still appreciate that, I guess. Very problematic. But one of the aspects of this is actually drifted into the world of comedy again. You made reference to the Chris D'Elia situation, which I doubt most of our listeners or viewers are familiar with.
Oh, really?
What's your perspective on that?
I thought he was pretty famous, in my opinion. He's like,
well, no, I just think that they may not be up on the situation, just because I don't think it's, to me, I've mostly heard about it from my friends who are like comedy fans.
Right. Okay. So it's not as big of a deal as
it hasn't spread into the non-comedy world.
Well, basically, Chris D'Elia is probably the most famous Los Angeles comic right now. So kind of in the world. And then to put it in perspective, if you don't know him, he's basically like what Dane Cook was in his prime. He's kind of the new version. And, a guy that girls like, and he's very popular with the ladies.
Good looking for a comic. Yes.
Good looking for a comic. So he got Me Too'd, and then it was the exact same thing with the statues. Within 24 hours, there was like 48 others. Now there's a big thing. We need to change the toxic masculinity in the comedy clubs. White comics are the problem, and just so within 24 hours, like this guy we have a problem with turned into just everyone, and you're like, I'm out. All right, I don't care. But there's no nuance with the Chris D'Elia one too, because the truth is, he was going in every city. He's messaging girls. He's just living that like old school rock star life, right? And sounds like he might have got free and loose with some of the ages. And if he did and he broke the law, then that's what it is. But we're living this time where there's never been more of a time where the conversations you have in private and the conversations you have in public have to be so different. Because everyone in private, Chris D'Elia, they go, he used his power to have sex with this like 19-year-old girl. And you have to go, ew, oh, disgusting. And meanwhile, most people are like, yeah, I get it. Like, yeah, okay. And then the other ones they're pushing on top of this, like, this other one that came out, he's one of the big, I can't remember the guy's name, but basically they go, the power dynamic, he was paying for everything and the power dynamic was off, and he was 2 years old. He was 21 and she was 18, and it was this whole thing. And you go, what is this even about? You go, I mean, listen, I hope we live in a world in the future where I'm going on a date with a girl and she's like, are you going to pick up that check? And I'm like, listen, I would, but we got to have an equal power dynamic or I'm sexually assaulting you. I hope that catches on.
So I have some questions for you about this. And I don't know how comfortable you'll be talking about it, but
I'm comfortable talking about it.
Have you seen the Louis movie, the one that got canceled? I Love You, Daddy.
White one?
The black and white one, yeah.
No, I never saw it. Have you seen it?
Yes. So thanks to a very kind listener to this podcast, about 2 years ago, I had mentioned in passing, I really wanted to see that movie because I heard that it was actually really good. And it obviously had, Malkovich and Chloe Grace Moretz and Rose Byrne.
It's kind of Louis in his prime, right?
Yeah. And I got this email from this random guy who said, actually, I got one of the screeners and I ripped it before they like shut it all down. If you want to have access to it, I can give you access to my server and you can watch it. I've since screened it for a bunch of people, including all of my female staffers. And basically everyone agrees it's like the most topical, the most interesting take on Me Too that they have seen in any kind of product.
And this was before he got Me Too.
And this is before, right? He made this before he got Me Too.
So wild,
It's kind of a self-criticism. And one of the elements of it that my female staffers have brought up is that they have every type of reaction to it, in the sense that there are women in the film who manipulate the situation, take advantage of it. There are women who are naive, and then there are women who are kind of judging everything that they're seeing going on in terms of this dynamic. You know, you have men who are exploiting the situation, and then you have men who are naive, and you have like the point being, you have the different attitudes and characters in it. And it's a real shame from my perspective that it hasn't gotten released in some form, because, and I think he did buy it back or buy the rights to it back, because it really is something that I think would provoke a really healthy conversation about it, as opposed to being, oh, you know, we can't watch this movie because a bad person made it.
Right. Well, that's why Louis was the voice of a generation. I mean, he was he was really at the top of his game of being able to break down what's happening.
Do you think he's going to be able to come back in some capacity?
Yeah, I think, I mean, you know, he's already come back and he's selling.
I got the special.
I mean, the industry that he would be coming back to really doesn't exist in the same way. They put such a tax on being, I mean, you kind of the people you mentioned, Mark Norman and Andrew Schultz, and you've kind of mentioned a lot of these comics. And around 2016, right? They basically put such a tax on being part of the industry. They go, listen, A, you're not allowed to tell the truth. B, we're going to, 1 in 5 of you, we're going to take everything away from you. And it's about, I would say it's about 15, 20% of people, like at some point in the next 6 years, they'll get everything taken away. They'll get fired from their show. C, you're not going to get a trial. So after that, you're going to be a social pariah. Like that, the tax that they put on being part of the industry, on top of the fact that you'll probably no one's going to like your shows because they're going to be garbage. So because of that, everyone said, well, I don't want to do that anymore. If I'm going to speak for a living and that's what I'm doing, and I can't tell the truth now, then why am I doing any of this? So a lot of people are doing their own thing right now, right? So like for Louis to kind of come back, I mean, he could start a podcast tomorrow and it would be huge. He just released his special. I'm sure he made millions of dollars on that. He's selling out arenas everywhere he goes. So, I mean, he's still going to be a voice of a generation. He's just not going to be able to be the Hollywood star he wanted to be. And that might be good. I mean, he was starting to kind of
he was drifting a little bit. Yeah.
He was starting to switch into Hollywood, Louis, because he knew how to play the game, and he's been in the industry long enough, and he's like, I know how to go on talk shows and talk about how Hillary Clinton's so awesome.
You're not going to be Kevin Hart, dude. So what does comedy need in this moment in terms of an institution or support system that prevents the inevitable cancellations that will affect anybody who has any kind of talent? I mean, you could cancel, I mentioned Burr. You could cancel Bill Burr for like 100 different things.
100 things, yeah.
And now granted, he's successful enough.
They don't.
But like they took a shot at Rogan just recently, what
are you going to take away? His RRS feed?
Yeah.
His RSS feed? What are you taking from him?
But I feel like, there's a ton of comics who are, a couple of tiers down, who we want to see improve and grow and be more successful and get to the point where they're the ones selling out arenas, in a couple of years, when they were doing openers just a couple of years ago. And I'm wondering, what is the alternative institutional structure that needs to exist for that? Is there one? Is there something that needs to be able to provide them kind of a fallback when they get hit inevitably by these things?
Well, there's two, I think two. Like one is if, there's like all these podcasts and stuff, like there's places like Gas Digital and stuff like that opening up that are kind of essentially becoming these mini networks, and like Andrew Schultz is clearly kind of building his little mini network. So maybe you kind of end up having all these mini networks that kind of replace that. But in terms of the structure, when you take Netflix, places like that, what it takes is for someone, you know what? Okay, so at a record label, sorry to give a long-winded version of this, but like
No, go
at
for
a
it.
record label, when a music changes, let's say there's like emo is the big thing, and then it switches and we're like, okay, now we're rap. What they do is they fire everyone and then bring in a new regime. So at Comedy Central, everyone there was part of like this woke era, right? South Park's still their biggest show. They've started all these shows that aren't doing very well, but the culture there would be the same as if they're like a rap label and everyone there is walking around with like goth face paint. You're like, no one wants to see this. All these shows are bad. So I don't see you being able to now take these like millennial, 30-something-year-old Comedy Central employees and be like, listen, now we want to go like make offensive comedy shows, and we want to do that with white people, and we don't care what they say. I just don't see that being a possibility without it, being such a public backlash. So I think someone would have to say, we're tired of losing money at these companies. Let's fire everyone and start again. Mm-hmm. Or if someone, a venture capitalist started his version of Netflix. But I think there'd have to be one of these places that's like, we're just our culture is funniness. We're not canceling people. We don't care what you do in your private life, and that's what it is. So I don't know. It'd be hard for that to happen, though.
So just to give you a point of comparison, I've had this conversation with a couple other people in different areas of industry. I was interviewing Lionel Shriver, who's an author, the other day, and she was talking about how she feels like there's going to need to be a new publishing house or something like that for when she inevitably, even as a best-selling novelist, gets canceled for some reason. Is what comedy needs right now basically? Is it its own publishing network? Is it like an alternative, non-woke Funny or Die? Is it something basically just to say, we want you to continue to be able to pay your rent and stay in comedy even after you might get canceled and naturally want to just move back home to Omaha?
Yeah, I mean, I guess what it needs is subjective, but if you look at what it is, what you're describing exists. I mean, you talk about someone like Mark Norman. I mean, he's doing well. Mm-hmm. He's got a huge Patreon. Shane Gillis got canceled. He's doing well.
Yeah.
That guy's making a good living. So a lot of these people are making good living. And that's one of the reasons why, another reason why some of these places are so bad. I mean, Comedy Central, for example, and I just shows at CBC. And imagine going to these people and going, hey, we want you to come, we're going to give you $200,000 a year to make this TV show. And it's going to be, you're going to jump through all these hoops, and it's going to be a full-time job for 7 months or whatever. And you go, I'm making $1 million a year. I'm doing a podcast once a week. Like, what are you talking about? So, and they have this attitude of like, you should be begging us for the job. And you're like, no, the tables have turned. It's kind of the most egregious version of that was when the Oscars fired Kevin Hart. And you're like, you need Kevin Hart. Kevin Hart doesn't need the Oscars. Yeah. He's the biggest comedian in the world right now, and you just lost him. I mean, he doesn't. What does this affect him? This affects you. So it's starting to be this thing where they're like, yeah, well, we're going to cancel you. And you're like, well, that's unfortunate for you that you're not going to have me on your network. Like, you know what I mean?
My
like
dream
thing.
Oscars host is Anthony Jeselnik from like 5 years ago.
He's funny. Yeah.
Just insult after insult after insult for the entire. But anyway, you
know what I mean? Like someone like you take these people, they get so big. Some of these guys, it's like you're trying to get me, not the opposite. So, and then also on top of that, you're like, hey, what about this tweet from 2001? You're like, I'm out.
You grew up in Canada?
Yeah, I'm from outside of Toronto, Ontario.
Okay. Who's doing good work in Canada other than the Letterkenny guys?
Yeah, so Canada's even a harder one. So I had some series at CBC, but it was very difficult to
speech codes seem seriously problematic up there.
The speech code's seriously problematic. There's picture this, like we just talked about, these big networks, but imagine in Canada, there's only one of them and the government runs it. So there's only one network, and it's very, it has one very specific perspective. The diversity initiatives and all that stuff are very, very huge. So I put it this way: I didn't go into a meeting in television for 3 years without like the first thing being like, yes, we like obviously you can't be the main guy because you're like a white male, and I had to apologize and blah 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 and all this stuff. Like, I had a series at the Canadian Broadcast Network that was probably the biggest digital series, and they kind of made promoted the two series above me to like the higher pay grade and made it the higher digital series and made them into TV shows. Whereas like I had my one episode had more views than like both of those combined, but you know, it was just, they're like, yeah, dude, the guy even called me, like a lot of people were there, were like, listen, we're trying, but it's like, you know, just, we're not making a show with a white dude right now. And if we are, it's going to be like a legacy white dude. Like, there's Schitt's Creek with Eugene Levy. So that's the thing. If they are, they're like, okay, we're going to make 30% of our shows with white people now. It's like, okay, well, but those are going to be the 60-year-old white dudes that, you know, like Eugene Levy, who live in America and come back and decided they want to do a show in Canada. So there isn't really a place to do what I do. So I just decided to move. And
Are you friends with Norm
Macdonald? No, I don't know him. I like him though.
He would, I think he would like your stuff. Maybe one of my prized elements is that he's followed me on Twitter for a while, and so we DM occasionally because we randomly at one point, and
he's great on Twitter.
He's great. If he was honest, I think, about like what he believes about everything, like if he just took like one day to just like say what he thinks about everything, he would never work again.
Right. Yeah.
And I think he knows that. So
he's such a brilliant satirist though, you know?
Oh yeah, man.
So he kind of does these things where he traps people into these positions without ever having, you know, he makes people defend their beliefs from first principles. I remember he was going on this show and he was like, you know, who do you think's more likely to hit you? And then they were like, what? And he's like, well, the black guy. And they were like, dude, you can't say that. And then he's like, well, because poor people are more violent and black people are more likely to be in poor situations. Like, do you not think that black people have less money than white people? I'm talking to a racist right here. And he just uses their logic against them in such a brilliant way. So, and, you know, with the trans stuff, when that stuff first started popping off, I remember he went on an interview and he was talking about how great trans people, and he's like, you know, I love people, but trans people, I love them the most. Except for this. And there's a lot of serial killers that were trans people, which is hard because I love the part of them that's trans, the best thing about them, but then the part that's serial killers I have trouble with. So he's just kind of finding these hypocrisies. So I respect him.
Well, and speaking of hypocrisies, I mean, his comment on Cosby, I still think is still the best. Is, you know, the thing that bugs me is the hypocrisy. Yeah. And he said, really? Because the thing that bothers me is the rape. You know. So in evaluating our current situation, comedy, when it comes to free speech and free thought, is always the canary in the coal mine. I mean, it's the first thing that people start to go after as being, that's not funny, or, you know.
And they also don't realize when they go after it, they're the reason it exists. Like they don't speak the language of comedy, so they don't understand the component that they are of the language. Like you just said, I can't say that. Why do you think the biggest comedians are all saying that now? It's because you just made it a hard thing to say, and people want to hear people say these things that you're not allowed to say. So it's still funny to watch them.
I have heard over the years, and actually Norman brought it up in his latest YouTube special, but my colleague Molly Hemingway, who's a comedy fan and a big fan of Chappelle's show and of like a lot of different sort of DC based comics over the years. She came to me, maybe, I think it may have been even 5 years ago, and said, you know, the thing that we need right now is comedy speakeasies. We need something that, you know, they take your phone away, they put it in a little bag, and then you go downstairs, and we're all making an agreement as a community.
And then comics yell the N-word.
Yeah. and to let jokes happen and to not try to cancel people over them. And you can maybe write about it afterwards or complain about it if you're really, you know, stick in the mud or whatever, but we're not going to do these viral videos of comics to take everything away from them. I wonder, I mean, I like it as an idea. I would invest in one. Do you think it's a good idea? Should people do it?
I mean, right now, most comedy club owners are kind of the on more of the free speech side, you know? Mm-hmm. So there is a lot of that going on already where comedy club owners are like, listen, I don't give a shit that you were canceled. I don't care. Like, I care who's a good comic, and they have these relationships. But, Yeah, there is something to be said about the people in the crowd having the phones and then sending the videos after, the people that are there in bad faith. Like, they're like, I didn't laugh at that. And you're like, well, you didn't come to laugh. You came to get mad, right? And then you're happy that you finally found something to get mad at. So yeah, I think there's something to be said about that. I mean, it's hard to enforce on like a smaller scale. Like someone like me, hard to. I'm trying to sell tickets as is, and then I go, also you got to put your phone away. And they're like, I don't know, I was barely gonna come as is.
Yeah. What's the attitude of the folks who own the comedy clubs in New York? Do you know, if you know them well?
Yeah, I've been hanging out with a few. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, what is their attitude about coming back, and their attitude about kind of that issue of just making sure that their place is not one that's going to be taken over by these woke rioting, people looking for anything to be offended by?
Well, I mean, what are they going to take away from them? Like they're a comedy club, right? So I think the comedy clubs, that's why they are kind of like the last bastion of free speech. I mean, you go to the Stand Comedy Club, people are saying whatever the hell they want, and people can get mad at it. But what do you email the manager? I remember Yuck Yucks was like that in Toronto. I remember they got, and the Corner Comedy Club, I did that a lot in Toronto too. It's like people would email the manager and they go, "We're so mad. This guy said whatever he wants," and then he just shows the guy and he goes, "Look what this person says about you." Like, they don't care. They don't care. So it's this, if you go to a restaurant and you go, the staff said this, and you go, okay, well then don't come here anymore. Like, if you don't care, they don't have any power, right? Their power is the canceling power, as it may be, revolves around people caring what they think. Mm-hmm. So as soon as you stop caring.
Yeah, it's enormous power to be able to say, I just don't care.
I don't care. Not only do I not care, it's like I'm the opposite. Because no one cares so much about having to say, people lying. Because I go, you guys can say you're nonsense, but the problem is you'd like me to say you're nonsense, and that's the problem. I don't care if I don't need you to tell the truth. I don't care. Anyone could lie as much as they want. But when you need me to lie, you're like, no, you can't say that. And I go, well, that's how I feel. And you're like, well, you're not allowed to say that. And I go, okay, well, I don't care what you think.
All right, I'm going to give you an opportunity to make a career damaging comment. Who is, among popular or well-known comics, who's the worst one out there right now? Just in terms of like crappy jokes, crappy non-jokes, crappy comedy. Like the person who shows up on your feed and you're just like, this person again.
Let's see. I don't know if I have that as much. Is more so I have people that, because instead of seeing all these people, you're like, oh, this person sucks. It's more sometimes I'm like disappointed at watching some of my heroes that are kind of not, I don't like it anymore. Yeah. When I watch Howard Stern doing what he does now, or even like Sacha Baron Cohen was like the ultimate hero for me.
Totally. No, I hear you. I hear you.
And he kind of went up and did this big speech for the ADL, and he kind of says, Facebook needs to censor people and this and that. And I go, these people that are kind of closing the door behind them, they go, oh, I got popular doing this edgy comedy and now I want to, shut the door of that. And he goes, they need to censor people on free speech. I go, okay, you got one of your most famous bits was you saying throw the Jew down a well, right?
Yeah.
And getting people to say that. I go, if you did that right now, by any measure that you're talking about, that would be banned from every single platform. Totally. And then he goes, but they've rewired it in their brain where he goes, no, but we were doing that to fight anti-Semitism. And he goes, I did Bruno to fight homophobia. And I go, okay, but what about when you were messing with feminists with Ali G? What were you fighting there? What were you fighting there? Nothing. You thought it was funny. So a lot of these people are kind of rewriting their past and pushing down people that were doing what they were doing, 10 years ago. And for me, that's something that I watch and I go, whereas like someone that I'm like, this person stinks, I just don't watch him. So I don't try to just be negative in that way.
The flip side of that question is, who's maybe the most corporate or most kind of mainstream, however you want to define it, major comic who you've seen sort of pleasantly wake up to how stupid that is? Like someone who has had corporate success but maybe is now kind of aware of the things that are necessary to get this right now, they're not actually good for comedy.
I mean, the number one would obviously be Louis.
Yeah.
Like Louis came back and he was red pilled, as they say.
Yeah.
For that one thing. So he kind of took the shield off and then he became that. But I think, the real move is probably if you get really popular and you want to have a movie and all that stuff, you kind of do the Daniel Tosh route where you stay away from stand-up for 10 years. Then when it dries up a little bit, come back into stand-up. But it's hard to be the greatest at a truth-telling medium when you can't tell the truth anymore.
No.
Like playing basketball with one arm tied behind your back, right?
So before I let you go, you have these videos. I encourage everyone to watch not just the Vice one, but definitely the government agent in quarantine one, the professional protester one, the Fox and CNN one was sent to me by people both at Fox and CNN.
Really?
Yes. And
that's so crazy to hear, man. Yeah, they've all been going viral, but when you see them on the internet going viral, you don't really know who that means. But
yeah, who's paying attention to them? Yes.
Yeah, as a guy who just moved here from Canada to see that's to hear that like all these people at these big news organizations are seeing it. That's very cool.
You're hitting the nerve, and that has a result. What's your next thing? Like, is there something that people can, other than subscribing to your YouTube channel, is there something that people can look forward to? And when are you going to maybe be touring again, or have you even thought about that?
Well, that's up to the world. I mean, that's not up to me. If the stand-up comedy clubs in Canada open back up, I might go back to Toronto. But for me, I try to release a special every year. So I have 2 of them on the internet if you want to talk. But right now, the main thing is I release a podcast every Friday called The Boyscast with Ryan Long. And I release a video every single Monday at youtube.com/Ryan Long Comedy. And then also on Instagram and Twitter. So right now, I'm like working pretty hard on that stuff and among other things. And I have some different projects and I have like some scripts in development and that. But the main thing is I spend 2 days making this podcast and 2 days making these videos every week. And that's kind of the majority of my life right now.
Well, good luck finding the Black trans woman who will inevitably be reading the lines in the scripts that you're pitching.
Yeah, exactly, right? Auditioning my replacements.
Exactly.
You want to know one quick funny one about that before you leave? So basically, we have to fill out diversity reports that say, what part of your crew isn't white and what part of your thing isn't white. So when I did it, I was going to be the director. I added all my stuff, and I was the director, editor, and scriptwriter. And they go, okay, so one of these can't be white. So I go, so I have to fire myself as the editor from my own show because I go, well, I want to do these jobs. It's my show. And they go, so I had to like fight to like hire myself because I'm white. They're like, you can't hire a white guy. I go, but the white guy's me. It's my show. It's just these like wild like scenarios that this whole thing is in.
It's going to be absolutely. I mean, we didn't even get into it, but the they're changing Kristen Bell's role in one thing. There was a Big Mouth.
You just did the Big Mouth.
Yeah. And it's like, I mean, come on. It's just. This is going to be so reductive and silly.
Yeah.
I mean, it's just at the end of the day, it's like, are you a good actress or bad? Because that's all that really matters, in this context. Anyway,
so Ryan Long. See why people that, there's a reason why, like you said, my videos are hitting a nerve. And I'm one of those reasons is because I'm, a guy that does this, I'm telling you what I actually think, and hopefully in a funny way. But these people are telling you what they think the world should look like instead of what it does look like, and people can tell the difference.
You can follow Ryan Long on Twitter at Ryan Long Comedy and find him as well on YouTube. Thanks so much, Ryan, for taking the time to join me today.
Hey, man, thanks for having me. Very cool to meet you and stuff.
Yeah. I'm Ben Domenech. You've been listening to another edition of the Federalist Radio Hour. We'll be back soon with more. Until then, be lovers of freedom and anxious for the fray.